Shut your financial mouth or else. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of people. Hello, John.
Hello, sir.
Bit of a threat there.
It is. We have some shocking news to share with our audience. I was sort of gobsmacked with what's really going on in Australia, and how is this country really running? Because I think what we think is happening is not really happening. So, obviously, I want to protect some of the sources that I have, but it was brought to my attention, again through direct and indirect sources, that APRA has been placing pressure on members of the mainstream media not to talk about the issue of bail-in or the legislation before Parliament. The reasoning that was given was that talking about this openly would cause financial instability, and obviously the role of APRA is to promote financial stability. So they basically have been saying that this whole process has been counterproductive. Nothing to see here. Don't talk about it, and don't contemplate the ideas of one nation because they're a bunch of crazy people.
Right. So there's two things there. The first is this bill, which is in Parliament.
Yes.
They don't want people to talk about it.
Yes.
Right?
Because talking about it will create more harm than good.
Yeah.
Even though it is a fact that this is before Parliament.
Yeah. Okay. And then the second is they're also taking a political stance.
I've made approaches to various members of the press, and you have as well.
Yep.
And what we have found on a lot of occasions that we don't want to touch these particular topics. So maybe you want to elaborate on that in terms of when you've approached the main elements of the mainstream media and they said, whether it's the cash ban, bail-in, or some of these other topics, debt bubble. No, look, we don't talk about that.
Yeah. Well, it's a consistent theme that I can say, John, is that where I get to what I think are critical issues, for example, the debt, the fact we've got too much debt in Australia and it's really hurting Australians. They'll go for the mortgage stress piece because that's relatively benign, but they won't go behind it to say, why is it like this, right? So people just say, we don't want to go there, right? I also tried to engage with a number of journalists before the Senate inquiry submission period closed with regard to this current piece of legislation, because I felt that this was a really important thing that they were exploring and it needed to have some attention. But no, nobody wanted to go near it until the submission period had shut, right? Which seems a bit weird.
Yes.
And I've had similar things with some of the other issues. So if I think some of the banking related issues. So a few years ago, I was on about the fact that banking fees in Australia relative to other countries are much higher. And the margins that banks get on their business in Australia is a whole lot higher. And it's nothing to do with wonderfully well-managed businesses. It's just that Australians are being screwed over. And again, I couldn't get anybody within the mainstream media to really get this and run with it because they all said, oh, no, it's too hard, right? And in fact, even years ago when I was inside a large company talking about this same sort of stuff, I was actually told by my then boss to stop talking about this stuff because essentially we were upsetting the financial community, we were upsetting the government. So there is a pattern here of people interfering and not wanting to go into what I think are critical issues that are actually really important to talk about and discuss and get underneath to really understand what's going on.
Yeah,
it just goes on and on.
Yes, and I'm glad you used the term the financial community. Now, after I heard some of these reports over the last couple of days, I have had a conversation with an individual who has been in the banking industry for a couple of decades, and what was said to me was that this tactic of don't talk about it because you're going to affect confidence, you're going to affect stability. Apparently, this is a well-known tactic in Sydney and Melbourne to suppress any conversation on anything that's sensitive or controversial to the interests of Australia's financial elite. And obviously, if there's any attempt to buck the trend, there's this pressure campaign And obviously, where they can, they try to push you out of the system, whether it's pushing you out of certain corporations for saying something controversial, like you said. And obviously, I've worked at large corporations myself in my career, and obviously there was sensitivities about, oh, you can't say these things publicly, or if you are a journalist reporting on legitimate news, you are counterproductive because you're going to create financial instability if you actually ventilate some of these important issues.
Yeah. And the point is that whenever this happens, actually democracy dies a little, right? Because it just continues this same process where essentially there is the real agenda and the perceived agenda, right? I'll give you a good example. I've had 5 people today contact me, on the old email and say, you keep talking about house prices dropping. There's no way house prices will drop. The RBA will make sure that house prices don't drop, right? The government will make sure that the home prices don't drop, right? And so they basically say, why are you saying all of this stuff? Because home prices will not drop. And I have to go back and say, well, actually, you say that, but actually there's a bunch of stuff that you need to understand. It might be quite impossible for them to stop home prices for you. I just come back to the fact that sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? And really, there should be the maximum exposure and the maximum truth out there so that we get the best understanding of what's going on, rather than the controlled narrative and the restricted narrative that so often is put out there. And as you highlight, quite often those in power want to hold power, want to restrict discussion and debate, want to actually spin and twist stories to be able to shape it in their own image, as it were. So what Interest of the People is about is disclosure, openness, based on fact, based on analysis, but making sure that more people know more about what's going on.